Here in Maine, polls close at 8 o'clock tomorrow night. Voters may wonder when they can expect results. Well, it's possible national races may take days. Here in Maine, it likely won't be too long. However, if no candidate gets more than 50% of the vote in some races, ranked choice voting would come into play. Those tabulations, if needed, may take days.
We may have to do a ranked choice voting tabulation in the presidential election or in one of the congressional elections. If we have to do ranked choice voting or a recount, then we would know the results probably in the week following the election. But on election night across the state, unofficially, Mainers will have a very good sense of where things stand.
Currently, only Maine and Alaska utilize ranked choice voting, although other states are voting to approve, repeal, or ban it.